Hello, everyone. Welcome to Avaya University's Healing from Childhood Trauma. I am Andy Anderson. My partner, Ike Allen, and I are the founders of Avaya, an enlightenment village. Thanks so much for joining us. And in this event, we are talking with some really incredible experts. We're talking with therapists, doctors, authors, podcasters, and more about how to heal from your experiences of childhood trauma. And together, we're sharing with you strategies and tools to help you learn to love yourself, to help you let go of your past, to live a peaceful, powerful life. Today, our guests are going to talk about understanding unresolved attachment to heal from loss and trauma. So please welcome back Sue Marriott and Ann Kelly. Hi there, ladies.
Hello. Hey, so happy to be here. Thank you so much for inviting us back.
I am so excited to have you back. And for those of you who don't know, Sue and Ann, I want to tell you a little bit about them and their work. And Sue is on your left and Ann is on your right. So I'm saying it in order. So these fabulous ladies are both psychotherapists in Austin, Texas. And together they co-host the top-rated podcast and online community called Therapist Uncensored. They bring decades of training and experience as well as cutting-edge research about modern attachment and neuroscience to their clients and listeners. And together they share a mission for building security around the world, one episode at a time. Therapist Uncensored now has over 500,000 downloads in 273 countries. And they were also featured speakers for another Avaya University event called Breaking Free from Abandonment and Betrayal. And we all loved them so much, so we had to have them back. So why don't we dive into what is your definition of trauma? And either of you can go first or ping pong back and forth, whatever you'd like.
So basically we think of trauma from a kind of a biological perspective. It's when the incoming stimulus, when the event overwhelms our coping capacity. And so we have, and it pops us into different versions of dysregulation in order to cope, basically. And the upshot of it is that something, it doesn't get processed all the way through if it's actually trauma. So that's what we're going to be talking about today is when we get trauma stuck in our bodies and what to do about that.
And it's important to remember that trauma, sometimes when we think of trauma, we think of a specific event. And yet trauma is not necessarily, it can be a specific event that really gets caught. It also can be an experience over a period of time. Like trauma in childhood could be ongoing neglect or ongoing misreading of the infant, et cetera. That could lead to trauma in our body as well.
That's right. And neglect actually is a lot worse than abuse anyway. So that's a
yeah, I've been learning a lot about that in this series and the emotional abuse and yes, neglect and things like that can be so incredibly harmful. So okay, great. So let's dive into attachment now. I'm guessing a lot of our viewers have heard potentially about what secure attachment is and maybe even what insecure attachment is, but what is disorganized or unresolved attachment?
So the gist of it is, you can be, like you said, probably people are familiar with attachment in general and that there's a secure category. And the way we talk about it is on the modern attachment spectrum, trying to bring it out of the research and make it more applicable to everyday people in everyday lives and with therapists and things like that. So again, the 1 minute version, right? As if we've been responded to in a consistent way. We have a way of seeing the world and presenting ourselves to the world that is secure. We trust people. We trust that we're going to get our needs met. The two insecure are preoccupied and dismissing or avoidant. And but what they discovered later was that there's actually a fourth. It's not exactly a category, but it's when things are bad enough that there's no organized. Those are all organized systems. Secure is an organized system. Preoccupied, like in other words, like I know how to manage the world by being very vigilant externally. That's preoccupied, or I know how to manage the world by keeping the world out, dismissive, avoidant. And this is where there's just this mix. We call it tie-dye, actually.
Right. We kind of use colors. And I think the key to the organized is it's predictable. That even if your caregiver as a young child might not have been consistently there for you, it was somewhat predictable. You can anticipate the reaction and how you modify to be able to keep the person who's keeping you the most safe close to you. And you'll hear it as disorganized or unresolved. That's when the individual who you turn to for safety is not safe and not very predictable, then your body can't get organized around a way to approach them to keep themselves safe.
Got it. Yeah. You know, one of the things I was reading in your bio earlier was around like safety and security. And I can't remember exactly the words. It was, oh, your mission is to build security around the world, one episode at a time. I think that's like, I love that, because so many people who've struggled with childhood trauma or trauma in general have security issues, safety issues. And I guess, would you just speak briefly to that? Like, why is it that if we've had, you know, struggles in childhood, that we have a hard time, right, feeling safe as adults?
Right. Well, it's baked in, actually. That's the unfortunate thing, is that it really becomes, you know, we're not even aware that it's happening. It's just really baked in, whether again, that we're very vigilant and we can't quite let our bodies let down, or again, whether we're doing a lot of numbing and avoiding in order to not get re-stimulated again. So that's part of the security thing. Sometimes we feel like we're being secure, right, but or that we are secure, but it will show up in our adult relationships often, like lack of trust, things like that.
And what I think also when we mean baked in, it actually much of our brain development actually happens postnatally in the first few years of life, in the first year of life. So we think we come into the world, but we come in ready to actually form connections in our brain that go towards keeping our body feeling safe and able to regulate or not. And if the first couple of years have not been secure for you, you may not have developed the kind of connections inside or the pathways strong enough, and instead have developed more pathways that are to keep you safe and secure, or to keep you more vigilant, as Sue was saying. So it's really, when she says baked in, it is really a creation of our brain that ends up happening that affects our relationships throughout our lives.
Got it. So you mentioned a moment ago something about resolved or unresolved. So what makes a trauma resolved or unresolved, and how can our viewers tell the difference for themselves?
Yeah,
great question.
That's a really good question. And one of the ways to think about it is that, you know, just to add to what Ann had just said, is that, so that's the attachment part that's baked in. But sometimes we can be, you know, moving along and then a trauma happens to us, right? That it's not necessarily an attachment thing. So then this question of how do we know if it's resolved or not, that basically it is that we are able to have a balanced sense of thinking and feeling. We're not flooded with it. Basically, let me do it the other way. What unresolved looks like is that something has happened to us, and if things go well, we cope, we get through it, and we
integrate it,
right, and we bring enough information forward to help protect us from that scary thing going forward. But so that's an integrated, like, that's trauma that's worked through. It looks like you can talk about it, you remember it, you know its significance, but you don't get flooded.
And you're talking about it. It's like something happens to you and you're going, oh my gosh, you know what happened to me? And you talk about it, you're telling about it, and you're remembering it rather than re-experiencing.
Right.
It's coherent. Now, the way that unresolved happens is either too much information gets brought forward, and so we can't get out of it. And that looks like nightmares. It looks like startle response. It looks like, so in other words, our body is too ready for the thing to happen again. Too much information has been brought forward. The other way that we can be unresolved is, again, the reverse. We keep hinting at this, but it's when we have to do the numbing, the disassociation, the avoidance, in order to not remember these things or process them.
To be too flooded by them.
Exactly. So if that typically is how it begins to look like, and which is why the resolution looks like it's a coherent story. It's a coherent narrative. We understand the meaning that it had to us, but we don't get, like when we're talking about it, we don't get lost in the pain. And also, though, we're able to talk about it. We're able to talk about the loss of a parent or a grandparent, a significant grandparent, and maybe even cry and feel about it, but not get lost in the feeling about it.
And recall it as an experience, because a lot of, especially early trauma, gets encoded in a very shameful way. And so a lot of individuals that have early trauma feel very unworthy and feel like the experience is part of who they are and feel a lot of shame. So you know that that's more of an unresolved experience, rather than as you move to a more resolved place, you're able to talk about the experiences separate from you and happening to you. And that's a really important progression in trying to integrate trauma, is to get it basically kind of out of you, and you're being able, as Sue says, tell a narrative about it rather than it being something that is you.
I love that. That's such
That defines you.
That defines you.
Yeah,
Yes.
no, I love that. That's great.
Yeah, that's such an important distinction. I totally get it. Like when you said that, right, if it's unresolved, it's like you're still experiencing it. You're still experiencing like whatever happened 30 years ago as if it's happening right now. And that's how our bodies, right, react. And right, when we can get to that point of coherently telling a story, it's almost like my imagining of it in the moment is like I look back at certain traumas in my life and I'm like, okay, if I kind of look at it as an observer now. I'm like, for things that I have, successfully like processed. Like when my dad died, it was a very traumatic death, alcoholism, end stage. It was horrible. But now I can look back at it and like talk about it as like, oh yeah, this happened. And, we had to clean up his house and we did this, that, and the other, but I don't have I miss him, but I don't have a lot of emotion around the experience anymore. I just miss him as my, not having my dad. But yeah, I see that. That's a great way of looking at it.
Hi there, this is Ike Allen, founder of Avaya. I wanted to take a moment and pause the masterclass to remind you that you can experience many more teachers in the free masterclass at avaya.com/healing. That's AVAIYA.com/healing. If you're not currently subscribed for the masterclass, please do so now so you can experience all the available classes in this exciting series. And now, back to the masterclass.
Yeah. One of the things you just said too is your body experiences it. A lot of times with pockets of unresolved trauma, we don't even recognize it, but our body does. Our body, I always like to say that our body's smarter than we are, than our mind. We give so much credit to our mind, but our body picks up things much faster than our mind. And in trauma, things that bring an association to it, a smell, etc., our bodies will respond to it, and we will respond in what looks like chaotic, like crazy ways. When we know that we have pockets of trauma, it's like, how did I respond in that way to this event? It makes no sense. And because of that, a lot of people feel a lot of shame because they have these pockets where they act and they just feel crazy. And I think a really important part of healing that is, Sue likes to say, it's knowing where your bones are buried. Knowing those events that make your body, if you have experiences that your body gets flooded or goes all the way down and goes flat, and you don't know why, there's likely a pocket of trauma there that needs to be resolved.
Got it. Okay. So moving a little bit towards the conversation of brain science, right? Neuroscience. This is such a big topic today, especially when it comes to trauma. So I think in your work, you talk about like trauma actually causing permanent brain damage. And I when I first read that, I was like, what? Like, how does that? So is that true? Is that like really what happens?
Well, it's funny. It is. Again, depending on the trauma and things like that, and if it's cumulative trauma, part of it really does affect brain development, and so that's part of the baked in thing. But our message is, so if you read some researchers, it is so depressing. You know what I mean? It's like, it'll describe, the corpus callosum and how it's shrunk and our amygdala is all messed up and all of these things. And
it does affect those things. It is true that it will affect the size and the shape of those things that keep you safe. And an overactive amygdala and a larger size, those are actually really, really true.
So here's an interesting part of it. But our point is that neuroplasticity is real, and that we are able to grow and heal, that the mind is that capable. So what will happen is, like, I'll give you an example of a little rat study. So they, researchers are so mean to these poor rats, but they'll do something where they'll they'll shock them and and associate it, say, with a color, right? So then the color comes on and they know the shock is coming. Well, so basically their brain will have that in it, and right away, they'll respond already in stress as soon as the light comes on.
Before the shock.
Right. So then they decouple it. So the light comes on and they don't get shocked. And basically, so in a way, it's sort of like a desensitization, right? Or we might say recovery from that trauma, because now when the light comes on, I don't respond. But what they found out that happens is that so that it's stored in this little pocket neurologically, and then these new experiences develop something over it. Like there's new connections, new myelinization, processing, which is part of why we're able to inhibit that every time the light comes on. But what they found is that if you go in and you clip those new experiences with those new neurons, then the fear is right back. So what that teaches us is that, yes, it's stored in our bodies, and it's and we're vulnerable to it, particularly under stress or under later traumas. You know, the more we have multiple traumas, the harder it is to do this recovery. But it also is true that there's a lot that you can do to work to heal and grow and
form new
experiences.
New experience will actually form new neural connections.
Yes.
And so those things that if you know how you hear, if you don't use it, you lose it. And we think of that in brain capacity and memory. So to always use your memory and always use your memory. Well, the opposite is the positive aspect of that is if you do neural pathways towards things that used to be traumatic, and you do that a great deal in secure relationships, whether it's a secure relationship with a therapist, secure relationships with a partner, you form neural pathways. And as you do that, those old ones, if you don't use it, you do start losing those connections. That's the exciting thing. And you can reform new pathways that then say, oh, wait, I'm jolting like this because I don't have trauma, not because of the situation. So the more understanding you have, the more self-compassion rather than judgment. Self-compassion is such a big part of this because it helps soothe that part of shame and form neural pathways. They really can grow and develop. That's the really wonderful. That's our aspect of growing security inside of us.
Absolutely. So for our viewers right now who have listened to the past however many minutes, and we've got an understanding of the attachment stuff, we got an understanding of security and neuroscience and all that. So what does someone do if they know they have unresolved issues from their childhood?
So here's the bad news. The bad news is we can't go into a closet and read a book and heal and grow. It does do some things. So like for this, if we can learn about the impact of trauma on the body, that's one part of it, and that is important. But there's no way to heal from this stuff without being in relationship. So it is, as Anne was saying, it's like these new experiences of safe relationships that grow it. So the way I describe it is like, you got to know where your bones are buried. Everybody's got some bones, you know. It doesn't mean we have to go dig up all of our old junk, childhood history in order to be okay. It just means that where our history is intruding into our life now, that we follow that back. And then we need to basically rework the map. So what we want to do is both like we've been talking about, have a coherent narrative and understand it. But the only way of doing that is by really getting in touch with the feelings. It has to be both. So usually change through trauma or resolving trauma is going to truly have a bottom up, is what we describe it, a bottom up experience where that we really feel it. So for example, Andy, you were describing about your father's loss. And like if you just kept it at a very intellectual level and never really felt it, that would be one thing. So for example, maybe with your husband or your partner, or a therapist or clergy or whoever the safe person is, that if they can help you get into the feeling and really like, you know, look, I know you say you're okay, but you know, who was he to you? What did he mean to you?
What was hard about the relationship?
What do you miss most about him? How about you write a letter of goodbye to him? Something to be able to really get the affect happening and released. And so usually it's a combination of that you can see it and that you feel it and that you're able to talk about it. So typically for us as therapists, it's either helping people get into the feeling so that it can basically do what it's supposed to do. You know, you feel it and it moves on. or get out of the feeling,
Right.
which is the when we're stuck in it, being able to get our minds turned on and the coherent understanding.
I think to add to that, I love what you're saying, Sue, and to add to that, I think is the understanding that we have a window of tolerance, and so that you want to be able to get into the feeling and experience it in a safe way. That's a really important part of healing trauma and something unresolved, but not flood with it, because that's where the pairing happens. It says getting in touch with those feelings is unsafe because now I'm overwhelmed and I'm pushing everybody away. So there's a window of tolerance, in other words, that so you don't try to do it all at once and all in one event, and it's through relationship and you let it unfold. So the suggestion is to go into the trauma in a really safe way, but in a way that you recognize when you're hitting the upper limit or the lower limit of that, and then come back. I mean, you can even use kindness or humor to kind of come in and go back and come in and go back, rather than we're going to dive all the way in. And that allows somebody's body to not feel too scared of processing it, because a lot of people understandably have a fear of going too close to something, because you can feel in your body that it could be too much. So to listen to that, to listen to yourself, because it's one of the things that's so important in resolving disorganized or unresolved attachment is boundaries, and the ability to know that you can keep yourself safe and the person with you can respect that. So knowing that if you start to feel too much, you can communicate that, and whomever's with you is right there instead of pushing you further. Then you develop the sense that you have some self-control, which is really an important part of healing in trauma.
Can I add one thing to that?
Yes, please.
A lot of times as therapists, as we're working with people that want to deal with their trauma, there's a common misconception of like, okay, I want to do this, let's go.
Right.
And there's this speed, you know what I mean? Like, I know this thing happened to me and I've been avoiding it in my life, let's go into it, which is great, except for what Anne's talking about that it can be, again, used to how we were taught as therapists to deal with trauma is to really push people into them and do the ab reactions and do the flashback, you know, like, and that can be re-traumatizing. It also makes me think of, you know, it's a very vulnerable time to make up stories about why my body is so dysregulated. And we have to be really careful about that as well, because our memories aren't objective, you know what I mean? So the idea is slow is fast. And sometimes working on the trauma is really simply working on secure attachment, because like Anne's saying, if that we hate ourselves because of the shame that you're talking about, we go into it and then we have this shame, you know, like whether we drink or we cut or we do these things to try to regulate, that's just re-traumatizing that little child in there. So by working on the attachment first and a secure foundation within ourselves, that we're going to treat ourselves kindly and with care and compassion, and interpersonal relationships that are kind and compassionate and real and authentic, not nice, but you know, nobody likes nice.
But like nice.
Yeah, you like it, but real, right? So some people get really frustrated. They're like, but I want to talk about my sexual abuse. It's like, we are directly working on your sexual abuse by working on relationships, on your self-harm, for example. Like it's a direct link, because as we can begin to help you observe yourself doing something dangerous and managing it, it really literally is. And a lot of times when we do really good work on the attachment part and on security, the trauma part is easy then to get to. It's when that's reversed and done in the wrong order that all kinds of havoc can happen.
That's so true.
Hi, it's Ike again. I wanted to remind you once more that you can experience many more teachers in our free masterclass at avaya.com/healing. That's AVAIYA.com/healing. If you're not currently subscribed for the masterclass, please do so now so you can experience all the available classes in this exciting series. And now, back to the masterclass.
Awesome. I love it all. You know, I'm having this kind of moment of thinking, like, it seems like a dance between, like how you guys are describing this is like a dance between the emotional, right, feeling body and the mind, because the mind plays a role in that. If you're right over feeling, maybe you're going to get to a point that's not right, you're flooded, like you're saying, right? So you need to kind of like utilize the mind in that way to pull back, but it's like this dance and this balance. Is that like, does that ring true to you?
That's a really great way. It is really a dance, because when we're also talking about the flooded part, and it's really important to remember that some ways of the dealing with integrating is to go down and to not touch it and cut off. And so, yeah, it is sort of a dance between being able to bring feelings in, whether you've cut them off too much or you experience it too high. And often people with trauma fluctuate between the two. They will feel a lot more numb. You might experience a lot of flat face, non-responsiveness out of a protection and go flat, and then when triggered, this high intensity. So it's important to know that it is a dance of trying to find. That's why we bring in the window of tolerance and try to bring in the experience in a more digestible way, I guess, for you and for other people.
And window of tolerance is a term that Dan Siegel, I believe this is right, Dan Siegel picked up from Pat Ogden. And I know that, I think Dan is in this series, Dan Siegel, and he talks a lot about integration, whether it be neural integration, meaning, again, like you were just saying, Andy, thinking and feeling, top, bottom, like somatic information as incorporated, like not externally oriented and not overly internally oriented, but being able to flow back and forth. So this idea of balance and integration will run through attachment stuff. It runs through trauma, and it sounds real easy. It's like, oh, let's all get balanced. But it's difficult. But once you're there, it's very easy. Like you were just describing with your father, the loss of your father. It's like you're not having to manage the thinking and the feeling. It just is how it is. And so it's really our natural state. So part of the healing of childhood trauma is returning us back to this natural state of integration.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was in a yoga class a couple days ago, and the teacher was joking about balance, right? Because that is our natural state, and yet, like, we're always on the journey to get balanced, right? We might maintain balance for a little while, and then things get off kilter again, and that's our life journey, right? We're always trying to balance.
I think so.
Well, and I love how you're saying that, because nobody stays in balance completely in even a day. It's one reason why Sue and I like to talk about attachment in particular and emotional regulation on a spectrum, because you can feel balanced in one level, you can feel balanced in one relationship and completely wonky in another. And that's due to kind of how we integrate those different types of relationships. Yeah. Right.
Exactly. Yes, absolutely. I can totally relate to yes, the balance right over here, but wait a second, the relationship with mom or with whoever, uncle, whoever from the past. Okay. No, that's not.
Can I speak to that real quick? Because I think that's an important thing. A lot of times when we have pockets of things that are unresolved, and maybe we don't even recognize it, we might go through periods of time, let's say as adults, of having short-term romantic relationships and then popping out of them. And sometimes what we like to bring into people's awareness is that attachment relationship really comes alive, or the difficulties when you're in a romantic relationship. So oftentimes when we first get in a romantic relationship, everything seems perfectly and wonderfully and balanced, right? Mm-hmm. But that's actually not balanced. That's a lot of chemical heroin, should we say, that's happening. It's like it's a great natural high. But as we level off and we get into a romantic relationship, it's that relationship that can trigger unresolved issues and can create that lack of balance. And we'll say, see, when I'm single, I don't have that. But when I get in a relationship, look how crazy I act. This person must be bad for me. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying it might not be the case, but it's always important to remember that if we're in balance when we're alone and out of balance in relationships, it's not necessarily the relationship throwing you off balance. It's that the relationship is triggering these things. The attachment system, and that needs to be tended to. And you'll notice it's predictable ways. You thought this person was going to be different than this person, and yet, lo and behold, eventually you're having the exact same experience. And that happens to all of us, and it's because there's things there to go, and it's a great thing to know, because then you get to resolve things that you've stuffed or are unaware of.
Mm-hmm. Oh yes, the power of the relationship to bring up all the stuff from the past.
So true.
Right, or parenting when our kids get that age.
Right. Yes.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Because it's so weird, and we see this in therapy again, that like somebody looks really good and they're fine, and all of a sudden they kind of begin to fall apart or have difficulty. But what has happened, if we think of it with this hat on, is that they have actually, before we were strangers, so they could do that really well. But as they actually form a more intimate relationship, it activates the attachment system. And so weirdly,
it activates the fear of loss.
Right. Yeah. Kind of whatever the problems are within the attachment system. So weirdly, as people get safe, they get unsafe. You know what I mean? Because the defenses, the formality and all that stuff goes away. And then it's actually the safety itself that then causes the dysregulation. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yes. That's a whole other way of looking at it, right? Like you enter into a relationship and then feel safe and secure and happy and maybe we're going to be together forever or whatever people tell themselves.
Right. Vulnerable.
But then
all those words.
Yeah, then the vulnerability is there, and then you have something to lose, right? Then it's like, oh my God, what if it doesn't work out? What if they leave me? All that stuff.
What if they see these parts of me that they saw me so ideally a couple of months ago, but now they're going to see those parts of me that are impossible or irritating,
or that I hate about myself.
Right. Yes. I love talking to you ladies. You're so fabulous. That was good.
We love talking to you.
Well, thank you. So we're running a little low on time, and I want to let everyone know there's a couple buttons below this video, and one of them takes everyone over to a free gift that Ann and Sue have for us, and the other one takes you over to an offer. So please tell us about these two things.
So the free gift is we have what we call the attachment bundle. And that is a set of, just by, taking that offer, we'll just give it to you. It's a whole lot more about attachment. There's videos, there's podcasts, there's some handouts, worksheets, not worksheets, but handouts and stuff. So basically it's a whole bundle of stuff. So
one of us, we talk about the spectrum. You will see a visual of the spectrum that will help it make a lot more sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, we really encourage people to go get that because it's, I think it'll really bring a lot of these points home. If this resonated with anybody, that would be a great place to start.
Yeah, let me make a quick note about that, because I do know that in our Breaking Free from Abandonment event, like people loved like you talking about the attachment and seeing the colors and seeing the spectrum, and it was really, we got such great feedback, as you know, because we had you on again for the same audience. So if any of you are interested in this conversation, I highly recommend you get that bundle, the downloads, everything, because it puts a much more like visual representation to what we're talking about here.
Yeah, and it really simplifies. This is such complex science, actually, between neurobiology and attachment and all of those things. And we just really try to make it usable. So that's that. And then because it is more complicated, we also have a course that will be offered at a discount for listeners of this show. And the code there would be Avaya. You would just, there's a promo code area and put that in, and we'll give you a discount on that workshop. So you'll see that below.
The course is about growing security inside you and in your relationship. So it goes into things more in depth, and I think really helps you understand it and gives you workable tools.
Right. And there's more, you'll get all the handouts and stuff with that course too, which is, again, I think really useful, because we can hear it, but it's really hard to have it percolate in.
Right. Yes. Well, thank you both for the gift and the offer, and everyone. Again, like I've worked with Ann and Sue a couple times now and can highly vouch for their work and all that they're doing to help people overcome traumas in life, childhood issues, all sorts of stuff. So please work with them if you're inspired. And again, there's a promo code right below this video, and it's spelled out for you. It's Avaya. So you would just put that in the cart as you check out. So are there any last insights either of you want to leave everyone with before we wrap up?
Well, big thing is relationship. If something's going wrong, turn to someone. We tend to not want to do that. So, and that's super scary.
And that doesn't mean romantic relationship.
Yeah,
any safe relationship. Turn towards. That's all right.
And don't feel bad if your primary relationship is a therapist. It still works.
It's really important to have that. Yeah.
Absolutely. Awesome. Thank you so much again for diving into this topic and for doing the fabulous work that you do in the world. We really appreciate it.
And thank you. You guys make this stuff available to everybody far and wide, and it's really, really a positive thing. So thank you for doing it.
Exciting.
It's our pleasure. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to Ann and Sue's class, and we'll see you on the next one. Here is To Your Journey to Healing from Childhood Trauma. Bye, everybody. Hey everyone, I just got off an incredible call with Sue Marriott and Ann Kelly from Therapist Uncensored. I love these two ladies. We've had them on several different events, and we just love bringing them back because I think the topic of attachment as it relates to whatever it is that you're working through in your life is so important, and they do such a great job of putting the pieces together and helping us through that stuff. So a couple of big take-home messages for me were, right, trying to determine if the trauma that you experienced as a child is resolved or unresolved, and how can you tell? I thought they did a really great job of explaining this, in that if it's resolved, it's something that you remember, it's something that you can talk about and have a coherent conversation about, and all of that, like kind of like I mentioned with the death of my father, and that was a very traumatic event for me. But the difference between like resolved and unresolved is when it's unresolved trauma, it's something you're literally reliving. You're reliving the moment that whatever happened to you as a child is happening to you as you're a 45-year-old woman. You're reliving that moment when you were a 9-year-old boy, when you're a 60-year-old man, whatever it is. So you're actually reliving it. Your body is reliving it. Your body is experiencing it similarly or in the same way that you experienced it as a child. So there's a big difference between that resolved and unresolved trauma. So one of the great pieces of information that they gave us about actually resolving trauma is that new experiences create new neural connections, right? So we talked about all the really like damage that can be happening to the brain in traumatic events as children, and how when we actually have these new experiences, we're literally rewiring our brain and creating these new neural connections into getting those traumas resolved, and to being able to talk about them in a way but not reliving them experientially through your body. So the last thing I wanted to mention was Ann and Sue talking about there's no way to heal except being in relationship. So I really thought that was so important, because I'm sure most of you can relate to when you're in relationship in life, right? We get triggered, things come up. We are reminded of things from our childhood. We're reminded of our parents. We're reminded of our siblings, of a bully in the schoolyard, whatever. And this is like the playground. This is the place where we can work through those issues, right? So again, there's no way to heal except being in relationship. So even when there are times when you want to shy away and withdrawal and unattached from people because of all these triggers coming up for you, right? These are these moments where we need to reach out to those that we trust, reach out to the people that we're in relationship with, and talk through this stuff if you're comfortable talking with them, or like Ann and Sue said, right? Maybe the person you need to talk to is a therapist. That's the person that's going to really help you through these traumatic events. So I thought that was really inspiring, that we're pack animals, right? We are designed to be in relationships. So let's use our relationships to help each other, get past these past traumas and things in our lives. So I hope you enjoyed this latest class, and please take advantage of Ann and Sue's free gift as well as their course if you're interested in diving deeper with them. And we will see you on the next one. Thanks, everyone.